All right, good afternoon and welcome back to session number 6 of our Paraeducator series. My name is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. And we have another team member on board, Dawn Berlin, Program Support Specialist with Supporting Inclusive Practices as well, who will be behind the scenes during this webinar, helping to answer your questions in the chat, to drop the link to the Padlet with additional resources and just support you along the way. So we'd like to welcome you again to this series, and it will be recorded and archived and posted to that Padlet if you're not able to join us for the duration of this series, or if you'd like to share it with colleagues along the way. We will have 2 more sessions after this, and those will be related to Universal Design for Learning with Dr. Katie Novak. So be sure to join us for those as well. Feel free to engage during the chat or through the chat, and there will be polling questions throughout that Eddie and Melora will be working with, and just getting your feedback and making sure that this is the most engaging webinar possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters today, Eddie and Melora.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for such an important topic today. We really appreciate you guys logging in and engaging with us this afternoon. Today, we are going to be talking about social emotional supports in the classroom and the importance of supporting the whole child. So sometimes the academic supports and the behavioral supports aren't the only aspect of a student's program that need to be considered. And so today we're really going to be looking at those social emotional supports and how they can be applied in the classroom. Next slide. So for an overview for today, we're going to be talking about the importance of social emotional supports. What are social emotional supports in the classroom, and then creating opportunities to practice those social emotional supports, and then viewing behavior in the context of coping skills or emotional supports. And we'll have embedded practice with each method, like Kristen was saying, and then hopefully some time for some questions. Can you do the next, like the annotation? Yep, there we go. So when we're looking at social emotional supports, why is it important to consider in the classroom? And there are several theorists, one of which is named Bronfenbrenner, is his last name, who really look at this contextual and interchanging level of development. So there's not just one thing that's impacting the child. It's really a series of events and a series of forms of development that impact the child. And one of those biggest areas is social emotional support. And you can see that with the area. So it's not just the physical development or the learning development or the cognitive development of a child that is important, but really we also need to be considering the social and emotional development of the student as well. And each area of development impacts and informs the other. So that's why this is so important to discuss today. Next slide. So here's a quote that we found just about some social emotional supports in the classroom. When we focus on the social and emotional aspect of working together on a science, math, literacy activity, we create a balanced experience that helps children in all aspects of development. So that just kind of supports what I was saying about this theory of development, that really one area of development really informs another, and we need all of them to come together to have a balanced child or a balanced student.
All right, so as we look into this and as we were sort of developing this training, one of the things we reflected on was our own personal education as children and adolescents. So we were wondering from all of you, who of you had social emotional supports embedded in their education? Feel free to answer that. Or how much social emotional supports were embedded.
About half of us have voted, so we'll give it just a couple more seconds.
I see someone in the chat saying none. That was my experience as well. All right. So it's a pretty good mix.
Pretty good mix. All right, thank you for that.
I think it is important to note that often was only 29% of you, which is the minority for sure.
Okay, so one of the things I want to keep in mind, and I want everyone to keep in mind, is that, for those of us that didn't have social emotional supports or coping skills instruction in schools, here we are tasked with teaching coping skills and providing social emotional support. So as we look at all of these elements, definitely be reflective of your own built-in supports, or what you're doing to cope, or how you cope, or are you doing anything to develop those coping strategies for yourself? Because we do work in stressful jobs, and everybody knows that never in the history of being told to calm down has someone calmed down. So social emotional skills in adulthood: more coping skills equals more positive adjustment, lower suicidal ideation, and that's according to Heifer 2017. However, many adults lack healthy and effective coping and regulatory skills. So the question is what if we had increased social emotional supports during school age years that taught us how to cope? And I think that's the question. And this is the big shift that at least I see as an educator, is education is changing from more of a conformity style instruction to more individuality. And then also, people are more and more being supported for their individuality, whether it's their beliefs or their preferences, and we should. Yet we all may not know how to support them throughout that process. And so teaching coping skills is a huge element of that. Next slide.
So what are we referring to when we talk about social emotional skills? I think that term is really, really loaded. And so for today's presentation, we really wanted to break it down into key areas because it really does encompass a lot. And so what we're going to be talking about today when looking at social emotional supports is the social element of that. So social supports and teaching children how to socialize. The emotional support, so how do children understand, identify, and deal with their emotions? Coping skills, so what do you do once you know those emotions and you know those feelings? Then what? How do you cope with them? And then regulatory support. So many of our students have difficulty with regulating their own body and regulating their emotions and their ability to access their education. So what regulatory supports can be in place to support our students? Next slide. So we're going to start with social supports in the classroom. So what do these look like? So things that you can be teaching or looking for if your student is doing or not is spontaneous and independent greetings. So teaching them how to greet their peers, how to greet their teacher, how to greet service providers, and really just how to interact within their classroom environment. Another one is conversation skills. So looking at, are they able to stay on topic, or do they keep bringing the conversation back to themselves? And maybe is their conversation really rigid? Like, do they only want to talk about dinosaurs or vacuums, whatever it is that they're interested in? Mastering reciprocal exchanges. So knowing that I can make a comment or ask a question on topic, and then I need to give the other person a turn to do the same thing, and making sure you're not capitalizing a conversation. So many of our students, just growing up, we're very egocentric in early stages of development, meaning that we're very into what we want to talk about and what we need. And so teaching our students to really engage with one another and have conversations that interest one another. And I think in today's world, this is even more important. I can't begin to tell you how many times on a school campus, or even if I'm out, well, when I was out at a restaurant before the pandemic, I would see like two adolescent age, school age children, and they're at the same table together, but they're literally on their phone texting each other, like texting each other a picture of their food. And I'm just like, what? They've lost the ability to converse with one another. And so really teaching those skills in the classroom. And then another really important one is teaching students, especially those students with developmental delays, how to slip in So how do you slip into a conversation that's already going on? How do you slip into a play activity? Because it's not typical, or individuals that do not demonstrate any special education needs, they don't say, can I play with you? Or do you want to talk to me? They slip in, they just start engaging. And so really teaching those types of skills to your students as well is really going to help their social development and their understanding of the social world. So when would we use these types of supports in the classroom? So sometimes they're really important for these social skills to develop are during group instruction. So teaching the student to raise their hand, to engage in the curriculum, to speak to their peers, maybe during breakout sessions. Also during recess, this is a really, really important time to target those social skills. And oftentimes supports are removed during recess because it's not an instructional time, but it really should be embedded in those times as well, because that's when we're expected to be social. And the same thing goes for lunch. Group projects, there's a lot of project-based learning going on in the classrooms now. And so having your student understand how to interact and work together with a partner to produce a product is extremely important. And that's where these social skills really come in. And then if your student doesn't understand something, right, I think some of the students that are quiet and maybe more reserved and don't have the best social skills or self-advocacy skills oftentimes go unnoticed, but there may be something they don't understand. So really teaching them how to speak up and to socialize and to talk to their teacher or engage with their students to get what they need. So those are all times within a classroom setting that it would be important to use social supports. Next slide. So we're going to do a little practice on understanding a scenario and how you can be providing those opportunities to teach a social skill. So we have a video of a student. He's taking a break in the hallway. This student happens to be nonverbal, because I hear this a lot too. How am I supposed to create these social opportunities? My student is nonverbal. So here's a video clip of a student, like I said, in the hallway taking a break, and they're targeting greetings. So I want you to look at how many opportunities were provided, and then what the target skill was, which I already told you. Next slide.
I'm Katie McGinley, and I'm a clinical classroom support supervisor here at Portview. So the following example that we're going to show you is for a student who has a goal to initiate greetings. He is allowed one gesture prompt. A gesture prompt is where we will just be pointing to whatever we want him to do on his AAC device.
Hi, Eden. Goodbye. Bye, Eden.
Nice job saying bye, Eden. That was awesome. The purpose of this goal is to get the student to initiate greetings with others, because often when other people walk by, he will just stare at them and is not initiating a lot of communication.
Goodbye. Hello. Hi. How are you? I'm fine. Okay, bye. Goodbye.
Nice job, Aiden. This goal is a part of the student's IEP.
So really targeting those goals in a structured way, especially for some of our more impacted students, can be really influential and beneficial. So it's really important to understand what the target skill is you want to teach, but also creating those opportunities like Katie did in the video. So for our next polling question, we are going to say, what was the social skill being targeted? And then how many opportunities was the student provided to work on that skill?
And for anyone on a different device that this may not pop up on your screen, especially if you have a phone that you're using, feel free to put it in the chat.
All right, so yes, that is correct. So it was the majority of you, 63%, had the correct answer. So they were working on greetings. So having the student Aiden say hi. And there was 2 opportunities that Katie provided. And I just want to point out, he was just on a break. So he could have just been left to walk the hall and go about his business. But it's really important to make those breaks meaningful. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, and really creating opportunities where we can in a natural setting. Next slide. Okay, so now let's start talking about emotional supports. I think this is extremely important. I am also a licensed psychologist, and I see a lot of students that really lack an understanding of their emotions and what they're feeling when they're feeling it. And then even further, what do they do with it once they know what they're feeling, then what? So I think this is a huge area, especially in today's world and with the current climate with the pandemic. Understanding our emotions and being able to identify them is extremely important. So how do we target this in the classroom or through an IEP or just through general curriculum and instruction? We need to teach our students how to target the emotion. Or how to understand what the emotion is and to be able to label it. So what is angry? What is happy? What is sad? And for some of our students, that's extremely difficult because teaching emotions is a pretty abstract comment. Topic. So it's important to teach it in themselves, like on themselves. And then it's oftentimes easier for students to understand it in others. So you can use things like characters in the curriculum, characters in books, other students in the classroom, things like that to help them understand their emotions. You also want to teach the student to identify their emotional state in the moment. So oftentimes during a challenging behavior, or if a student is upset, or if there is a peer rivalry on the playground, we oftentimes just try and immediately stop it, but really helping the student identify it in the moment and identify what is their body telling them and what is their body doing and what emotion does that evoke. Those types of learning opportunities are extremely important because, as we all know, our cognitive functioning really decreases as we get upset or in a heightened sense of arousal. And so to understand what our body is telling us when we're angry is really important. And again, I just want to say that with individuals who maybe have learning disabilities or developmental disabilities, remember the visual supports from our behavior supports training that we did initially in this series. And then finally, you want to identify, teach, and redirect to proven strategies and behaviors that are contextually relevant for each emotion. So what do I mean by that? That's a mouthful. You want to understand for that individual student, what works when they're mad to calm them down? What works when they're sad to redirect their thoughts to something more positive? What works for that child when they're happy? It's not appropriate to be jumping up and down and flapping when we're happy. Like, what would work for that student to demonstrate that they're happy and then to be able to regulate to get back to baseline, regardless of the emotion. And those need to be identified early on and then taught and practiced because it's not naturally in our repertoire to know I'm feeling this way, I need to do this. So when would you use these in the classroom? I started to say this just a second ago. You want to implement these things before the student becomes escalated or upset. And we talked about identifying precursors in a couple of our trainings. So you really want to understand what those child's emotional states look like and what the process is to get to a heightened state. And you really want to redirect to these emotional supports prior to the student fully escalating. That's going to prevent a more heightened state from ever occurring because they're going to start coping and regulating and dealing with the emotion before they get more upset. You're also going to want to do what we call positive practice throughout the entire day. So positive practice is when we are calm, when we're at baseline, when there's no triggers or anything that's significantly wrong with us, practice those trials just like they were in the hallway. They were just practicing spontaneous greetings in the hope that when a peer comes to that student, he'll then greet them. And you also want to model when you notice other students or characters in the curriculum demonstrate the need for emotional supports. Our students have a difficult time often relating to other individuals. And so really modeling for them and pointing out, look, Timmy fell off the swing. He's upset. he can go ask for help. So really modeling what to do when you're feeling a certain way. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're gonna have another video. This, for those of you that were in our other presentations, we're trying to pull it all together here. So this is a video that you guys saw before of a student engaging in a math goal. So I want you to try and identify his precursor to the larger emotion, which I'll let you know for this student, the larger emotion is full outburst, severe physical aggression, biting, kicking, and then self-injury also. So he's gonna have a precursor to the larger emotion. And then what is the emotional regulation skill and reaction to that emotion? So we can play the video.
Hi, I'm Tamara. I am a CSS here. We will be working with a student on a math goal. So before I do start the goal, I will do a preference assessment to see what he is working for and to make sure he is motivated. What are you working for? Cookies or chips? Which one? Cookies? Cookies? Okay, put your feet down. Look, we need 2 more tokens for cookies, okay? All right, we're gonna do some math. He will be choosing 2 items from the shopping list, and then I will be telling him the prices of the 2 items, and I will write them down on the board, and he would have to use a calculator to add the 2 together. And Cheez-Its, nice choice. All right, listen. So the chips are 50 cents. So while I was attempting to begin the goal, he did attempt to engage in a physical aggression towards me. So I evaded that and prompted him to use functional communication to request for a break from the demand. Be careful. Good job asking for a break, Aiden. He's doing very well in the school.
All right, next slide.
And real quick, Laura, before we go on, we had a question in the chat about the devices that the students are using. Is there a particular name for those? Are they GoPro? You know what?
At PortView, we just use iPad minis for most of our students, different students for their communication device. Some of them have the Leap device, some of them have the GoTalk, but a majority of our students use iPad minis or the full-size iPad with Proloquo to go. Just requesting in that Aiden with the greetings was a real size iPad, and then Aiden in that video is an iPad mini, but both Proloquo to go is the software. So in that last video, and think about this, the precursor is going to might be hard to identify. So what is the precursor to the larger emotion demonstrated? And what is the strategy used to calm him down? So A, making loud noises, and then the strategy to calm him down is break, the delivery of the instruction, and then redirection to his communication device. C, reaching to hit the paraeducator's head, and then his emotion support was taking a break in the sensory chair. Or D, making loud noises, and then she was making him continue with the task. Close vote, yeah. Okay, I knew this was going to be a hard one, but the correct answer, so his precursor for his larger behavior, the full outburst that I described with the severe physical aggression and the self-injury, is the hitting on the head. So that was the precursor, where then she did redirect to the communication device, but the question was, what was the strategy used to calm him down, which was that break. But we're really want to teaching those, like I said in the earlier slides, we want to teach the student to meet their own needs. And so this paraeducator prompted him to ask for the break. Rather than just saying, you need a break, she was teaching him functional communication skills. You need to ask for that break. And then he knew he could get up and take the break that he needed. Again, another thing about breaks are not just idle time for the student to be in their own thoughts, getting more upset, getting angry. You want to provide something for them that you know is going to help calm them down. And we're going to be talking about that in our 4th social emotional support regulatory skills. But I just wanted to point out for this student, it wasn't just a break on the ground or a break at his desk or a break on a chair. That specific sensory chair or bungee chair was extremely calming for that student. So you really want to utilize your breaks as opportunities to help cope and calm down. Next slide. Next.
All right. Coping skills supports. Okay, so some strategies you can use in the classroom that we've discussed, breaks with input needed. So what about the break can the student engage in, or what during the break can the student engage in that will aid in either regulation or coping? And that can even just be a rejuvenation so that they can get back to working hard again. And all of us need those types of breaks. And I think as adults, sometimes we overlook that we probably take them in order to focus better at work. These are things that our kids that we serve would benefit from learning on an ongoing basis throughout the day. Another strategy would be just drawing, a tactile task, writing, coloring, or engaging in some sort of puzzle, or even just stacking, whatever the student is willing to engage in. I had a student a long time ago that every time I asked if he wanted a break, he thought I was putting him on timeout. And so in order to teach him the effectiveness of taking a break and taking time away from something that was frustrating him, I actually ended up pairing that break with these blocks that he loved. And so it became break with blocks. And then eventually I faded out blocks so that he would accept break without engaging in challenging behavior because he thought he was getting in trouble. So strategies like that would be certainly appropriate, because break in and of itself is meaningless. It's the value you add to it with the activities itself, and as well as the student experiencing feeling better, whether that means calming down, whether that means recouping energy. It just depends on the situation. So when a student's having difficulty responding appropriately to their emotions, maybe they're not identifying them, maybe they don't realize that their focus is diminishing, maybe they're fidgeting too much in their seat and it's going to result in them being called out for not attending. Those are great times to facilitate a break so that the student can restore and get back to the academic curriculum of the moment. The other is when your student is unable to access educational setting due to their emotional state. So, they're either disrupting the class or they're just very dysregulated, and they're not going to be successful in that moment. That is a great opportunity to try one of these strategies that will help them, again, return to the academic environment successfully. Now, we all have strategies for this, but maybe we haven't sort of taken stock of what those strategies are. But if we don't, all of us in this wonderful Zoom room, we need them, because we can't be coaches before we're models. And we need to be able to model these types of skills and how we cope. The great thing about an in-person classroom environment is that we all have different emotions throughout the day, and we can really share with our students how we get through the day, our stresses, our celebrations, et cetera, et cetera. So think about the things that work for you and start there, and teach your students things that are familiar to you for calming down. If you don't have them, then figure out what they are, because you're not going to be able to stay calm during escalated states of your students. And that can look like anything. It can look like running away, it can look like yelling, or it can look like just staying frozen and not responding at all. One of the things that Melora and I work with especially new step on, is when you have a student that's flailing on the ground because they're upset and they're in a tantrum, and then they start to calm down. What you'll often see with inexperienced staff is they just stand there and they watch them, and they're not getting them engaged. That's the moment to get them engaged and get that interaction. All the things that we wish they knew, we teach them there. So think about those circumstances. Some of you are not in in-person learning, but this is a great opportunity to really take stock of the coping skills that you utilize, coping skills that you can implement in your classroom. And, you know, when you do go back in person, give them a shot. All right, next slide. Okay, so what we want you to do, rather than go home and forget that we asked you to take stock of your coping skills, is to take 1 to 2 minutes to identify your existing coping strategies and how you can apply them to regulate your own behavior in the classroom. Please type responses in the chat box. So it is 1:30 on the nose. We'll give you till 1:32.
Not taking it personally, that's huge.
And just real quick, as people are typing in, we're seeing a lot of deep breathing. Do you guys have any information about why neurologically that's so good for us? Why is that such a beneficial coping mechanism?
It restores our oxygen levels, I believe.
Yeah, no, the research that I've reviewed, especially if you do it properly and you're breathing through your nose and out your mouth, it does restore your brain's oxygen levels and allows you to better focus, especially if you're doing it at a slow pace. It's sort of one of those instinctual ways of restoration because the body relies on oxygen. Now, if we're in panic state and we're breathing through our mouth, in addition to doing it rapidly, that's obviously not going to have the same effect. But beyond the oxygen piece, you know, the focus, and if you're focusing on monitoring your breathing and slowing it down, that takes your mind away from whatever stressor was previously there.
I know that's one of the things I do is like if I'm in a challenging behavior or if a student, you know, is hitting me or digging their nails in me, as soon as I start feeling my cheeks to get flushed and my heart starts pounding a little bit, I start doing yoga breathing because you have to focus on it and you have to count it out. And I even model it for my students. It just happened yesterday. The student was banging his head on the desk and on his knee. He was perseverating on his parents' approval. He had refused to do his goal. And so then he was perseverating on his parents being mad at him. So he kept injuring himself and perseverating. And so I told him to take deep breaths and it wasn't working at all. He just said no and banged his hand again. And so I started doing it very exaggeratedly. So I sat down and I started doing it. And then sure enough, without me saying anything, he joined in. The other really important thing I saw, like gardening, exercising, that's something that we talk to our paraeducators a lot about. So those aren't necessarily ones that you would do in the classroom, but it's so important for our own mental health in coming to our classrooms as our best self to do whatever that looks like for you. If it's gardening, running, yoga, Pilates, whatever it is, that is so, so, so important. But I saw a ton of things coming up and it's just so cool to see that you're all thinking about it and noting it down because it really is an important aspect of our ability to educate effectively.
All right, next slide. So before we go into this regulatory piece, just think about all those things that you contributed just now, and imagine your classroom environments as they're going to exist or as they used to exist, and just kind of ask yourself, what if I incorporated these things throughout the day, not as a response to stress, but as an antecedent to stress? And what would that look like? How would that affect your overall day? Okay, so supports for regulation. There's different arousal states, right? So there's under aroused and over aroused. And we talked about this before. Over aroused would be, inability to sit still, jumping up and down, talking loud, yelling, screaming, running away. And under aroused would be tired, inability to focus, slumped posture, hood overhead. So there's different activities for each of those states. And the goal is if over aroused is over here and under aroused is over here, we want to get right in the middle. Okay. So if we're under aroused, we want to bring them up. And if we're over aroused, we want to bring them down. Okay. So for under aroused, some strategy would be jumping, bouncing, jumping again, or spinning. For over aroused, it would be something like fidgets. Someone actually brought up fidgets in there. I thought that was super cool. Heavy work or pulling, squeezing, weighted blanket, vest, or lap pad. Those are all things to regulate over arousal.
I just want to say one thing about sensory fidgets that I think is so awesome, especially when we're really looking at supporting inclusive practices and moving to more in an inclusion model. Even children in general education settings, like fidgets are becoming like a thing. They're like kind of cool. And so I think that's such a great strategy for maybe our students that have like learning disabilities or autism or other developmental delays that are being pushed in and included in general education settings, because it's not going to make them look different or it's not going to make them look odd. And also be creative with what you're using for your fidgets. We actually have an employee that was talking to us and she had like earphone. It looked like earbuds, but like a cord like that would go in her phone or in a AirPod to listen to music, and it had like a beat on it that she was just moving. And I thought that was so cool too, because no one would notice that that was something that was helping the child regulate. It just looks like something that any teenage student would have, or any adult student for that matter. Sorry.
And so to address those regulatory needs, one of the strategies, and we talked about this before as well, is the sensory diet. Obviously, with something that is prescribed like that, we want to consult with the occupational therapy team on campus and make sure that it is implemented in such a way that does result in self-regulation. But the big piece with all of this is that the coping aspect is training the student to implement it on their own. When they're older, if they still need somebody to help them, then we haven't taught them to cope. We've just taught them to follow instructions. And I think that's the switch, right? We're not teaching kids to follow just instructions here. We're teaching them to cope. So when do you use these things? When you need to change arousal state for success with accessing the curriculum, okay? So inability to focus, inability to sit still. When the student has social, emotional, or coping skills in their behavioral repertoire and can start self-regulating. Now, this is really important because just because they can complete whatever the coping activity is, doesn't mean it's a coping skill. What makes it a coping skill is that it actually affects their state, right? And we'll go into how to do that in the context of a behavior, but until they actually feel it, something calm them down, it is not a coping skill. Until it works to calm them down, for example, it is not a coping skill. And then we want them to implement them. We want to give them these types of regulatory supports and skills so that they can implement them independently as needed, as all of you have just said that you do. So all of these things, remember, not every coping skill should involve having to ask for a break. Coping skills should involve what can I do, what a student has access to at their desk in order to remain focused, in order to not get up from their seat. Okay. And all of these things, the first question that I asked before we got into the slide was, what happens if we do it throughout the day? So these strategies should be implemented throughout the day, regardless of state, in order to maintain their emotional state.
You want to be proactive with these versus reactive. So once the student gets so heightened or so in an emotional state, it's not going to be as effective as if you're doing it all day long and prescribing it all day long.
Plus, the repetition is going to allow that student to access it quicker once they are in an escalated state. If they haven't had the repetition, they're not going to know how to do it when their cognition is low. Next slide. Okay, so this is a latency scenario. What we want you to do is watch the video clip of the PVP occupational therapy team, and please note the arousing and alerting activities as well as the calming activities.
This is a demonstration of a student doing a sensory diet. He's starting with the staff doing alerting activities. You can see this is alerting. He's having to pay a lot of attention to stay on the ball. With his balance, he had to visually focus on what he was throwing. And with the sensory diets, this is something that the staff follows every day. The student could be having it twice a day, up to maybe every 20 minutes. A student has a sensory diet, and the sensory diet is to help the student regulate to get to that just right ability to be learning. The student is still continuing a sensory diet. This is his second alerting activity, and students usually have between 3 and 5 alerting activities. And so it's, again, the fast movement. Now the student is transitioning to the calming portion of a sensory diet. And you can notice that he's moving slow. He's pulling on the TheraBand, but nothing is quick or jerky that would alert him. This is all slow, soothing types of movement. Okay, our student is doing a second calming activity. And this is called the sled. And there's a lot of resistance. He has weights. The sled is very heavy, plus he added weights. So he's getting a lot of input. And all that muscle work is very calming. Heavy muscle work calms the whole body.
Okay. So you're gonna pick them up and put them in the container.
This is an example of doing the sensory diet in the classroom. And our student is getting a lot of alerting activity here. He's bending down, reaching up. Now he's standing up and bending down. So there's a lot of movement there, but he's still staying at his desk, and you don't need to go to the OT room.
Okay, we're gonna do 10 of those. So count for me. 1.
This is another example of a sensory activity for alerting that you can do in the classroom.
3.
He's getting a lot of movement here. He's getting pressure on his hands and the clapping where he has to be alert. You don't need to go to the OT room for this. Okay, now the student has done his alerting activities, and now we want to get him back down and do some calming activities. This is a great activity to do at the student's desk. A lot of the students have their own therapy. So he's taking little beads and he's pulling them out. So he's using a lot of pressure. So you can again think of the deep bear hug, but it's for his hands. He's actually tensing up his arms all the way. So he's getting a lot of heavy muscle work there for a calming activity. Our student is doing his second calming activity. He's doing counting, which sometimes can help with regulation. He's pushing, and it's all a lot of heavy work while he's doing the movement. So again, he's using his muscles, so it's really calming for him.
10.
All right, so one of the alerting activities used was a double shot of espresso, B, balancing while throwing, or C, swinging on the therapy swing, or D, B, and C. I think they're going to get it.
Good job. Yes. We tricked you a little bit because we said one of the learning activities, but there's actually two there. I'm happy to see that no one thought that giving their student a double shot of espresso was a good idea.
You can give me one though. Next one.
All right. So we've talked about this throughout. We've talked about it throughout today. We've talked about it in our behavior supports training. We talked about it in our data collection training. In order for these skills and these supports to be effective and to get into the repertoire of our students, we need to be creating regular opportunities for them. And that doesn't just mean one a day or one a week. They really need this daily, hourly, and depending on the student, like Lori said, our occupational therapist in the video, sometimes up to 20 minutes a day. So, or sorry, every 20 minutes in a day. So what are some places where we can create these opportunities and how? So the classroom, we're all paraeducators and we're working in the classrooms. But in order to create these opportunities, you need to prepare. You need to know what the lessons are going to be. So for example, if you know you have a student that gets escalated during group instruction because there's so much going on, or maybe the student gets really mad when they raise their hand and they're not called on, you need to prepare and have the visual supports ready, or any of those like sensory fidgets that we talked about, or any of the items from the student sensory diet available so the student can be redirected prior to escalation or becoming upset. You want to make sure that the student has what they need to be provided for multiple opportunities in that session or in that teaching session. Another example of this, and we're going to actually be watching a video clip on it, is if your student is nonverbal, for example, programming their device, programming however it is that they communicate so that they're going to be able to participate in that conversation or in that group lesson. If the lesson's on weather and the student does not have any weather icons in their communicative device, we've literally taken away the opportunity for them to access their education. They can no longer then participate in that group. So we need to plan and be prepared and have all the materials necessary that we need in the classroom. Here at Portview, we have backpacks for our staff, or fanny packs, since those came back in style. So they put all the materials they need in those things so that they're always on them no matter what. A very, very common missed opportunity for social emotional skills, coping skills, social for sure skills is during recess and lunch. I can't begin to tell you how many times we do consulting at other schools or other settings, and there's a nonverbal student or a student that needs facilitated or assistance with communicating, and any device, any visual supports, any visual cues don't go out to recess or lunch with them. But if we think about our education, when did we socialize with our friends? When did we get emotional support from our peers? When were we expected to calm down and kind of get our jitters out? At recess and lunch. So if those social emotional supports that we've identified for that student aren't available to them during this critical time, we're taking away again all of those opportunities for that positive practice that we talked about and for that student to really be successful in these times. When I say create opportunities and no idle time, again, this goes back to if students that have these social emotional needs are just left, yes, I probably do think idle. Thank you. Not Billy Idol, ideally. Thank you. If there's that time, often if there's an individual with mental health issues or difficulty processing or regulating, that idle time, IDLE time, is just time for them to perseverate and get lost in their thoughts. And so you really, again, want to make sure that you're providing those opportunities for positive practice during that time. And then finally, during the student services. So just because the student's no longer in the classroom or in the group setting, and they go to service providers, sometimes speech and language pathologists aren't educated on these types of social emotional support. So it's our role as paraeducators to bring it to them and help embed it in the session so that the student is getting those same supports when they're at their services. And again, really programming for those sessions. So the next video that we're going to watch is actually a speech therapy session where they're working on conversations, and she's going to talk about how she kind of programmed some of those social supports into the iPad before the session.
My name is Rebecca Lozano. I am part of the speech team, and we're going to engage in a conversation with the CSPs and the students. So we're going to first have them say hi, how are you? You can help model and have them do it. So first we'll start with Christian. Christian, you have a friend.
Christian,
look,
ready?
I see a friend. What can you say?
Waving.
Good.
Use our words and say hi.
We really want to start this year to have conversations where the CSPs aren't just there and they feel like they can't help us at all. Anyone can be helpful in speech, and especially the CSPs that are with the students all day long, they can really help elaborate on speech. So we want the CSPs to feel comfortable to engage in speech therapy as well.
How are you? Hello, how are you?
Cody, your friend asked you, how are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
How are you? How are you?
We tend to prepare questions going forward. We're going to have CSPs help model and start getting questions ready beforehand, because we're seeing that students tend to spend a lot of time getting their thoughts together and creating a sentence where if the CSP is able to help them beforehand while the other student's still answering, the speech flows much smoother. There you go, a sandwich and chips. Nice job. All right, well, I've been craving pizza. So we're gonna look at some pizza and put it on. Look, what should I do? What do I need to do, Christian? It's in a box. What do I need to do? You can tell me to open. One of our other groups that we love to do is a speech push-in where it's the whole class and we get a lot of language that way. But for the small groups, we tend to do 2 to 3 students because they can all answer and interact with each other and definitely build a relationship.
Open
it, okay.
Good job.
Okay. Cody, should I get it? Should I get it? You can tell me.
Get it.
Okay, here we go. I have 1 slice for you. Here, Christian, I have 1 slice for you. Look, for you. Can you ask Cody what you want? Look, what do you want? Ask him, Christian.
What do you want done?
Cody, what do you want? Do you want sauce or cheese? Okay, you can say it. Here, Christian, Cody wants cheese. Can you give it to him? Give it to him. Woo! Good job. Today was a great example of how we had 2 students engage in a conversation, ask about their day, and then build a pizza together. And they were definitely engaged and interacting, and it was a great session.
So that was just an example of creating those opportunities. And had the speech pathologist not talked to the paraeducator prior to the session, the paraeducator wouldn't have included all of those icons about the pizza or knowing that they're going to have those conversation exchanges into the student's device. And on the end of the speech pathologist, she really needed to plan for the activity so that she ensured she had the proper materials also. So in order to create those opportunities, we really need to be planning ahead and communicating and collaborating with all providers on campus.
I will say too, just, on the conversational piece, when we have students that are struggling in their academic environments, a lot of it is because they're not conversing enough with the classroom team. They haven't built that relationship. It's, primarily just following instructions or not following instructions. So, and even with, and especially with nonverbal students, the devices in their backpack or whatever, and that repetition is not there. So, at a minimum, over this next school year, when you get back in person, try to converse more with your students, especially those that are struggling, not only for that relationship, but for their mental health. I think it's so important. Okay, so we'll talk about social emotional skills in the context of behavior. Challenging behavior is misperceived as we got to stop it moment, and maybe it's because you think it shouldn't be happening, or someone's going to judge you because your student's misbehaving, or your group of students are misbehaving, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is we have to expect that some form of challenging behavior is going to occur, whether it's not paying attention or whether it's self-injurious behavior, okay? And the expectation of its occurrence is going to result in planning for it. But first and foremost, one of the things that we discovered through our research, especially because we banned restraint and seclusion at our school, so there was no opportunity to jump in and just stop the behavior. We saw it as an opportunity to practice coping skills. And that moment, that crazy moment where the student is engaging in aggression, engaging in self-injury, that is when we needed to start practicing that coping skills, because what a better time for the student to experience engaging in a coping skill and calming down. There's nothing more reinforcing than that. And then they see it's effective, okay? So then the student gets a very literal and real-time experience into how coping skills work. And then we get the opportunity to reinforce it, because we can reinforce them not for calming down, we're reinforcing them for engaging in the coping skill. Okay, reinforcing somebody for calming down is very abstract, right? What does that mean? How do we replicate it? But engaging in the actual act of coping that results in calming down is very reinforceable, and you can replicate it across different behaviors or different settings. So it should be expected that students are going to make mistakes and misbehave. And as educators, we must see these moments as opportunities to support and teach, right? And that's why we have to be good at coping ourselves, okay? I think that throughout this pandemic, we've all had to practice coping. And I would say that because all 249 of you have logged in today, you are all good at coping, because you've added one more thing to your task list that could potentially be stressful, and you've made it through this last hour. So hopefully what we've taught you today is going to allow you to get back in that classroom and teach these students how to be better at coping, how to better regulate their mental health, how to better attend in class, and how to better let you know how they're feeling, especially if they're not feeling good.
Right.
Next slide, please. All right, that's our information. If anybody needs to get a hold of us or wants to chat or needs advice or whatever, let us know. That phone number is actually incorrect. We'll update it on a follow-up email or something. But chances of us answering the phone are probably slim to none anyway. So just email us.
Email us, yeah,
All right, next slide.
that's it.
Okay,
Done.
any questions, or do we have time?
We do have time with any last minute questions. I know Don's been doing a great job, and I think Janelle popped in too, in terms of answering questions in the chat. So we'll just scroll through, see if we have any other ones in here. Lots of thank yous coming through, but no other questions. We'll give it just a minute in case anyone does have anything. And while you're thinking of those questions, don't forget to join us for our last two sessions beginning April 8th. And those are going to be focused on UDL with Dr. Katie Novak. And we just really want to thank both Drs. Tomeno and Miguel for all of their amazing support and presentations, content, practice sessions, polling, everything these last three sessions. Very, very well received and high attendance. So obviously the information is needed, and we're just very, very glad that you continue to partner with us. We're so lucky. So I'm not seeing any other questions. Lots of thank yous scrolling through. So again, if you missed any portion of this or want to go back and check it out or share it with others, please visit the Padlet. And I think either Don or Janelle will drop that back into the chat toward the end. And we just thank you so much for participating. And one more thank you, the California Department of Education, El Dorado County Office, and Riverside County Office for making this series at no cost to all participants throughout California. So thank you so much. We'll stay on for just a few minutes. We'll stop the recording and have a great day.
And I am dropping the link and to the Padlet in the chat again, and the